equivalent fractions and decimals. So we're still working with the concept of changing fractions into decimals. So what we want to be able to do is be able to work in between fractions and decimals, and we're going to revisit the skill of equivalent fractions. If we had the fraction 7/10 and we wanted to know how many hundredths that was, we always ask ourselves, how do we go from tenths to hundredths? And that would be times 10. Whatever we do on the bottom, we do on the top. So 10 over 10. And the reason this works is the identity property. Anytime you multiply by 1, you get the same number. So 10 over 10 is equivalent to 1. 10 times 10 is 100, so 7 times 10 is 70. So 7/10 is the same thing as 70 hundredths. If we were to write these as decimals, it would look like this. 7/10 is equal to 70 hundredths. The boys and girls hear from me that once you have a decimal, you can add as many zeros to the right of the decimal as you would like and not change the value of the number. So 70 hundredths is the same thing as 700 thousandths, and it would be the same thing as whatever this number would be, which is well beyond 4th grade. But we could keep adding zeros to the right and not change the value of the decimal. That is helpful information to have as we move forward. So here we have 20 hundredths, and we want to know how many tens that is equal to. So we ask ourselves, how do we go from hundredths to tenths? And we do that with division, because we need to decrease the number. So 100 divided by 10 equals 10. Again, whatever we do on the bottom, we do on the top. And again, the identity property kicks in. Anytime I divide by 1, I do not change the value of the answer, the number. So 100 divided by 10 was 10. 20 divided by 10 is 2. And the way that would look as decimals would be 0 and 20 hundredths is equal to 0 and 2 tenths. And that's why we want to be able to move easily between tenths and hundredths. Let's have a look at a few others. Here we have a mixed number. So if we want to write this as a mixed number in the hundredths, the whole number does not change. It'll still remain 3. How do we change 5/10 to something hundredths? Again, to go from tenths to hundredths, we multiply by 10. Whatever we do on the denominator, we're going to do to the numerator. So 5 times 10 would be 50. 3 and 5/10 is equal to 3 and 50 hundredths. And as decimals, that would look like this. 3 and 5/10 equals 3 and 50 hundredths. Notice we just have a 0 to the right of the decimal. Does not change the value. What about 90 hundredths? Here we want to go to tenths. How do we go from hundredths to tenths? We divide. Here we're going to divide by 10. Whatever we do on the denominator, we do for the numerator. So 90 divided by 10 would be 9. 90 hundredths equals 9 tenths. 90 hundredths equals 9 tenths. And lastly, what if we started with 0 and 70 hundredths? What would that be equal to? Well, from all of our work here, we should see that that would be equal to 0 and 7 tenths. Notice that 0 to the right of the decimal does not change the value. So in hundredths, it would be 70 hundredths. In tenths, it would be 7 tenths. And if we wanted the fractions, those would be easy to write over here. 70 hundredths and 7/10. This is how we do equivalent fractions in decimals.